Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Training Industry Leader Talk, the future of performance management, sponsored by InfoPro Learning, SweetRush, Allego, WhatFix, and the Regis Company. So I'm Liz Spate, the events marketing specialist here at Training Industry, and it is wonderful to have you with us here today. Before we get started, though, I would like to quickly go over a few housekeeping items to help you interact with our speakers and get the most out of today's program. So I've already seen some of you have done it, but if you haven't, let's open up those chat windows and let us know where you're joining us from today. And with that, I'm broadcasting live from Raleigh, North Carolina, and it's just a pleasure to have you with us here today. So while you're opening up those chat windows, feel free to use this chat window for any comments. But for those questions, if you could please submit them in the Q&A panel on your toolbar below. We will be addressing all of the questions at the end of the program, but do not hesitate to plug them throughout. And if there is any questions that didn't get addressed, the company, the sponsor, whoever's speaking will totally reach out to you as soon as possible. And once the session ends, a brief survey will appear in your browser. Please take a moment to share your feedback on the session and speakers. And all of our sessions are being recorded and archived on trainingindustry.com. And you will receive a follow-up email from us that will include a link to the on-demand program for you to share with your team. Now, if this is your first training industry event, we would love to welcome you. We exist to make connections among learning and development professionals, and we offer tons of resources to support your role in L&D, like live events like today's Leader Talk, as well as through articles on our website, our magazine, conferences, research reports, our podcast, even our membership. We would also love to hear about what you've learned from today's session on social media, so please follow us on your favorite platform so we can continue that conversation. And John, yes, you will have access to all of the recordings in that follow-up email. Now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers. We have Therese Longo, who is a seasoned learning and development professional and solution architect at SweetRush, where she helps organizations craft high-impact learning solutions that drive measurable business results. And then we have Jeannie Hitchcock, who is solutions architect at SweetRush as well, specializing in bridging the gap between complex business challenges and award-winning learning solutions. So with that, ladies, take it away.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome. In this 45-minute session, Teresa and I are just going to talk about performance management. The goal here is for you to walk away with a simple framework that'll help you think differently about how you're addressing performance issues in your workplace. And just before we get started, I want to let you know a little bit more about SweetRush for those of you who are new to our organization. We've been a strong player in the L&D industry for the past 25 years. And just this past January, we joined the NIIT family of learning services, expanding our reach even more. And this topic is perfect for us because we live for improving performance in your organizations and using some of the tools that we're going to talk about today. We offer premium learning solutions to the world's largest organizations, and our amazing and talented team, you all, creates literal magic with the latest tech. Let me tell you, I kid you not, we're here for staff augmentation. When you need an extra hand, talent placement, consulting, you name it. We tell our clients, dream it, and we can create it. And of course, we're honored to receive numerous industry awards for the solutions that we develop with our amazing client partners, which may be some of you here today. All right, and so we want to start with this baseline here to understand where you feel that you're at effectively managing performance. So think if you feel like you've been throwing some darts at a dartboard, trying to fix performance issues. Maybe you're thinking, gosh, is it the training quality? What's happening? It's just not moving the needle. Throw the one in the chat. If it's put a 2 in there, if you're like, it's hit or miss, kind of depends. Or a 3 if you feel like you're crushing it. You're doing a proper analysis, you're digging in, you're doing the right things, you've got this, and you're just here to lend us a helping hand.
Yeah. So I see lots of 1s and 2s in the chat. A 1.5 even. Somewhere in between the 1 and 2. Understandable. Great.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to pass it over to Therese. She's going to start us off with a little story. So hopefully you've got a hot beverage ready for story time. Take it away, Therese.
All right. Thanks, Jeannie. So meet Mia. She's a new barista at a local coffee shop. She went through onboarding. She learned the menu, reviewed recipes and processes, and also shadowed another barista for a few days. She's been on the job for a few weeks now. At first, everything seemed fine, but then the manager noticed that during the morning rush, orders began stacking up and customers were waiting longer than they should be. After taking a closer look, the manager realized that Mia isn't able to create beverages quickly enough to keep up with the demand, especially during a rush.
Okay, so we've got a gap, right? She's not able to keep up the demand. She's not making them fast enough. What do you think most managers would do next? Go ahead and respond that in the chat. Add more employees,
Train
train
her,
her, right? Ask Mia, that's a good one.
help her,
Mm-hmm.
private chat, move her to a different role.
Would ask her to move faster.
These are great. All good, all good solutions.
Mm-hmm. So this is the moment where a lot of managers might make the leap to quickly throw some training at the problem. Give her an e-learning course on efficiency or teach her how to make drinks faster. Just give it to the whole staff, blanket the whole problem here. What's the harm, right? But if we don't understand what's really causing the problem, not only are we spending time, money, resources to create and assign the training, the more we throw ineffective training at our employees, the less meaning they find in it and the less trust they're going to put into the important training later, right? You're losing that trust every time that you are pushing out training that's not going to solve the problem. They feel it, they know that it's not connecting with them. And this is exactly why we have to step back and diagnose the problem by looking at the work, the worker, and the workplace.
So enabling good performance starts with understanding these three aspects that Jeannie just mentioned, the work, the worker, and the workplace. This framework is based on the work of human performance technology, or HPT pioneers and thought leaders such as Tom Gilbert, Joe Harless, and Carl Binder. And HPT research tells us that skills and knowledge are not usually the primary cause of poor performance. It actually accounts for only about 10 to 20% of all performance issues. So instead of jumping to training, which we know is time consuming and expensive, we can use this simple framework to analyze performance and improve it. So let's take a closer look at each of these three areas. First, we look at the work. This is what is produced, or what we call outputs, and we'll get into more detail about what that means in the next slide. But once we determine the outputs, we need to define the standards, or what good looks like. Next, we look at the worker. This is the capability of the employee to do the work and includes their knowledge, skills, and motivation. And finally, we want to look at the workplace. This is the environment that supports the worker's performance and includes things like tools and resources, processes and workflow, support and feedback, incentives, and consequences. So let's take a deeper look at the work. So when we think about work, what if we shifted from defining it as activities and behaviors to what those activities actually produce? And I like to call these the valuable accomplishments, or outputs, because what we produce is what actually contributes to business results. So in Mia's case, it's not just that she's making drinks, what she does every day on her job, but it's producing a latte, a finished beverage that a customer receives. Sure, there are steps involved, there's behaviors, sequences, and techniques, but those behaviors only matter because of what they create. And once we've defined the output, then it's really easy for us to define the standards. So what does a good one look like? For example, here with Mia, the latte, the standards might be it's the right temperature, not too hot, not lukewarm. The milk is smooth and velvety, not foamy or flat. The espresso is balanced. It's not bitter, it's not weak. And the drink is presented well. We don't have beverage spilled off the side of the mug, and the latte art is perfect. It's delivered within 3 minutes. So these need to be clear and concise and agreed upon. For example, just saying it's the right temperature isn't enough, because right for who? I might like it really hot, and Jeannie might like it a little less hot. So you need to make sure that the business decides what the standards are for the quality that they're looking for. So defining the work this way sets expectations for Mia and doesn't leave her guessing. We know when people have to guess, it leaves the door open for inconsistent performance. So let's go back to Mia for a minute. After the manager realizes that Mia isn't able to create beverages quickly enough, she pauses for a moment. She doesn't jump to solutions or assumes it's a training issue. She considers something else. She asks herself, have I actually been clear about what I expect? So instead of sending Mia back to training, she decides to have a conversation with Mia, not a corrective conversation, but a clarifying one. She sits down with Mia and asks her to walk her through what she's aiming for when she makes a drink. She's asking her, what does a good latte look like to you? How fast do you think it should be made during the morning rush? And how do you know when you've gotten it right? And what she's really listening for isn't just effort or what she does. She's listening for alignment. Does Mia have a clear picture of the output? Does she understand the standards? Or is she filling in the gaps on her own? Because if expectations aren't clear, no amount of training is going to fix this problem. So during the conversation, Mia says, well, I'm not really sure how fast I'm supposed to create the beverages. And quite honestly, can I prioritize speed over quality during a rush? And sometimes I'm not sure what good looks like. So the manager realizes that Mia clearly didn't understand the expectations. And through this conversation, she was able to understand the gap and then adjust by setting clear expectations. So in Mia's case, having a conversation may be enough, but there are other ways that we can ensure expectations are clear. And I like to go over those 4 ways here. So first, make good visible. Telling people what good looks like might not be enough. They may need to see what excellent looks like, and they also might want to see what acceptable looks like, what poor looks like, so they can see that comparison. Additionally, we need to make expectations measurable because if it's vague, then um, people have to guess and it's subjective. Second, create shared understanding. Managers need to be aligned on what good looks like. If different managers have different expectations for the same output, this is really going to cause confusion and inconsistent performance. Third, reinforce expectations in the flow of work, not just in training. Also, connect it to purpose. Why does this matter? Employees love to know how their work impacts businesses. Great lattes make for better customer experiences and influences repeat business. And finally, build expectations in the system. Job age, checklists, visual standards, so people don't have to rely on their memory. So once the work is clearly defined, now we can look at the worker. Over to you, Jeannie.
All right. So now we have the expectation set, the standards are clear. We're looking at Mia, the worker. And for Mia, the gap can be in knowledge, skill, or motivation. And to find out where the gap is and what really the real problem is, you have to observe and take note of each possible performance gap isolated from the others. So what you're looking for are patterns and correlations to your observations. So when X happens, then we notice Y and Z, and then we're also doing a little bit of process of elimination. So this, we know it's not this, this, and this, and now I can clearly see that here's the opportunity for improvement here. Let's dig into each of those. So knowledge gap, right? This one is, I think, the one that most often comes up as the training solution. Like maybe they just don't know, right? So the knowledge gap is the mental block. We need to find out if Mia knows how to make a latte. Does she have the recipe instructions memorized? Or if she has a job aid in a standard set for her, does she have access to that and can she reference it quickly? When we're observing her and making notes, if I'm trying to sit back and if I have the opportunity to sit with a clipboard and watch just to see if she has a knowledge gap, then I'm looking for things like she's staring at the buttons at the machine before she clicks on or presses them. Maybe she's hesitating before she reaches for a syrup. You're looking for that internal gear turning, right? Those are those those visible signs that she doesn't have those steps memorized and she's trying to retrieve the information. She may also, that her hands are stopping because her brain is searching. So you can also have a conversation with her and you can ask her just to simply walk me through how to make a flat white. What's the recipe? Tell me the steps. And that is isolated from the skill of doing it. Remember, so if we ask them how they can create the recipe or use the recipe, then that's not telling us they have the skill to actually make it. So now we're going to move on to skill. Skill gaps is the muscle memory block. So she knows the steps. Maybe she does have them memorized, but maybe she doesn't have the skills to perform under pressure. And that's the big piece here, the under pressure part, the environment in which we're expecting them to perform. So it's important to point out again that you cannot assess a skill through a written assessment. Skills must be observed. Someone can talk all day long about the explaining a skill that you need to have for a particular task, explaining the recipe, but you have to see them do it. And here at the coffee shop, it's pretty straightforward. It's one-on-one. Again, I can see if Mia's looking uncoordinated. Maybe she's fumbling with the frother wand. She's kind of dropping something. She's fumbling with the buttons. Maybe just you can see that uncoordinated physical signs there, and then maybe lacking that parallel processing. So, which is multitasking. Is she standing in front of the frother and waiting instead of also filling a cup of ice over here for the next drink and preparing something here for the next drink? Is she multitasking or does she not have that skill yet? You can also have a conversation with her. You can ask her what part of the drink making process is slowing her hands down the most. And that might be able to pinpoint maybe a particular tool within her environment that's slowing her down that she doesn't have the skills yet to use. Okay, and then motivation. This one's tricky because if we outright ask Mia if she's motivated at work, she's likely going to say, yeah, I'm here, I'm ready to go. But and in a physical environment, we can look for signs here with, is she moving with urgency or is she dragging her feet? Does she seem distracted? Is she, keeping her head down and avoiding eye contact? Those are some observable, obvious signs, but it might be more than that too. Maybe she is lacking motivation because she doesn't have the skills to work under pressure. And now she's feeling a little discouraged. And it's a combination of those things. So maybe she's feeling a little anxious. And again, we can't outright ask her. So maybe it's an anonymous survey out to the whole team to ask about how they feel about peak hours and if the expectations are achievable, those kind of questions. And even if more than one person has a negative response on that survey, then we can address it as a staff that way too. All right, let's see how she did. So we have in this sense, this is a on-site situation. We have a manager who's able to use a clipboard and we'll see Mia's results here. And it looks like it's a little bit of everything. So there's knowledge gaps. She turns out didn't know that she actually had a 3-minute target. Whoops, we didn't have that expectation set. That's a big one. The skill of working under pressure. You ask her to make a latte just standing there, before the store opens, and she's fine. She makes it really quickly, actually. It's fine. But as soon as she sees those tickets piling up, the lines out the door, all of that environmental pressure, now she doesn't have that skill to perform in that environment. And that's the skill that she needs to practice. And the motivation. So just like we thought, it's that discouragement of not being able to perform and maybe a little anxiety. And she's kind of getting down on herself, thinking, like, oh man, I don't know if I can do this. And that's affecting her motivation, which kind of is a snowball effect, right? So what do we do with this information? We've got issues all across the board. For knowledge gaps, we can provide a job aid. Give her the knowledge, right? Give her the information. But it's important to point out that with a job aid, we want to provide opportunities to practice using that job aid, unless we want to have them practice to memorize or practice to use it, thinking about all those things too, instead of just providing it to them, making sure they can access it quickly on the job in the pressure environment. And then also the for skill gap, we're providing the practice opportunities. That's the big ticket here. If we need to intervene with skills, then a skill gap, then we need to allow practice, and not just any practice, but practice in the realistic environment as best as possible. So if the skill is required to perform under time pressure or in a loud or cold or whatever that environment is, taking the time to address those variables appropriately is how they'll actually practice that skill and get stronger. And then motivation, we're going to talk about this more in the workplace section that Therese will cover, but basically we're talking about incentives and positive reinforcement for this scenario here for Mia. Mia just needs that positive reinforcement to keep going. All right. Now, here's one part I would want to step back for just a second. Some of you might be thinking, like, okay, Jeannie, this is nice for this small coffee shop, pretty straightforward. The manager has the time to hold a clipboard and have this one-on-one observation. But what about large scale or even virtual environments? How do you assess skill at scale? You already told me that you can't assess skill through a knowledge assessment. How do I perform? How do I do that? Right? Well, this process does require investment in time and resources to establish and to get it right. But we just can't express enough the importance of this proper analysis for improving performance. So when we're talking about skills, again, that sandbox simulation. Can you recreate that same pressure environment? If it's virtual, maybe you're creating that environment, everything feels the same. The interface, everything that if they have multiple contacts coming at once, all the same things that you can recreate as possible. And then maybe you're assessing through click movements, tracking it that way, or screen recordings. Maybe with video. So if you have, maybe you have an employee that's prompted to record themselves performing the skill if they're on site or virtual, recording their screen, performing the skill. And maybe it's a centralized trainer. So we've got one person sitting in one location and all of this footage comes to them and they can use a rubric to assess the skill. Or it's 2026, so maybe it's an AI grading tool that reviews all the footage, or empowers some top performers. Think about how that would make them feel to feel that they are now being utilized as a skill validator. That's more boots on the ground. Get them out there, give them the clipboard, or if it's virtual, let them do some coaching and observing some screen recordings, and they can report back to managers as well. And again, too, when you're having that peer review process, you're now upskilling and taking that top performer's skill level and knowledge base to the next level by empowering them to teach, right? That's that highest level of learning there is when your ability to teach. And then lastly, how do you assess motivation at a grand scale? The questionnaires. Maybe you send out an anonymous questionnaire to all the staff that asks about how they're feeling about certain situations that might affect their motivation. And when it's anonymous and then also reviewed and addressed at scale, you bring all the results back in together and say, like, all right, look, here's what we're seeing. And here's how we're going to address it as a team. That transparency will help promote people to respond accurately and honestly in these questionnaires. And motivation is a really big key part here, right? So it's often overlooked. And if it's that will versus skill situation, that's something that really needs to be addressed, or your training's just not going to land. Oh, Teresa, you're on mute.
Got it. So we've looked at the work and we've looked at the worker. So now let's take a look at the workplace. So the workplace is where performance is either supported or undermined. So we need to take a look closer at these four critical elements. First, it's the tools and the resources. Do people have what they need to do the job? Are the tools reliable and accessible? Next, we want to look at processes and workflow. Is there a clear, efficient way to get the work done, or are there bottlenecks, confusion, or maybe even unnecessary complexity, and support and feedback. Are the people getting timely, useful input on how they're doing, especially in the moment when it matters most? And then finally, as Jeannie was talking about, connecting incentives and consequences to the motivation of the learner. What's being reinforced? What's being discouraged? And are those signals aligned with, the performance that we're really looking for? These are the conditions that shape performance every day. And when they're off, we start to see breakdowns that have nothing to do with skill, knowledge, or effort. So let's go back to Mia for a minute. And then we want to ask her, what in the environment might be making it hard for her to succeed? And what we find is when we look at the environment, that the manager uncovers the following things. The espresso machine isn't reliable. It's not quick enough. It's not producing the lattes fast enough. The shop is understaffed during peak hours. There's no clear workflow for handling multiple drinks. And Mia's not getting feedback in the moment to help her adjust. So you need to remember, even capable people who have the skills and knowledge, who understand the expectations, will struggle in an environment that doesn't support them. Right.
Seeing some emojis.
I know. I love it. Right. So once we've looked at the environment and they have identified the issues, usually the solutions are fairly evident, right? Just in what the issue is. If the espresso machine is unreliable, that's clearly not a training issue, that's a tool issue. So we fix or replace the equipment. If the shop is understaffed during peak hours, Mia can't physically keep up with the demand, so we adjust staffing. If there's no clear workflow for handling multiple drinks, then she's figuring it out on the fly every time, and that's not efficient. So we define a better process. And if she's not getting feedback in the moment, she has no way to adjust and improve during the rush. So we really need to add some real-time coaching. So the caveat here is that sometimes it's not possible to fix all of these things, or at least not right away. So, I want to take us back to the work for a minute and remember that if we don't fix the environment, we have to adjust the expectations and adjust them for what's realistic. And I think that's something that we just don't do often enough. Employees are expected to be exemplary performers all the time under whatever conditions, even though, those conditions make it difficult for them to perform at their best. So, um, So let's bring this full circle. The manager noticed orders are stacking up, customers are waiting, and the easy answer would be to give Mia more training. But instead, we took a different approach. We looked at the work, the worker, and the workplace. And this approach is wonderful because it looks at all the areas that impact performance. So starting with the work, we clarified exactly what Mia was expected to produce and what a great latte looks like. And we also told her how fast it should be made during a rush. We removed that guesswork for her. Then the worker. We made sure Mia had the capability to meet those expectations. We provided job aids and focused practice. We provided real feedback and even addressed motivation and incentives and positive reinforcement. And finally, the workplace. We improved the environment around her. We gave her reliable tools, a smoother workflow during peak times, better in the moment support and feedback, and incentives that actually reinforced the right behaviors. And what happens? The performance improves. Not because we added more training, but because we addressed the full system of performance. And that's really the real power of this framework. It gives you a practical, structured way to diagnose what's really going on and then take the action where it really matters. So one of the things I love about this framework is that it's not just something that you use when things go wrong. You can use it in two really powerful ways. And the first is proactively. So before someone even struggles, before day one, you can use this to design the performance system in advance. So you're creating your onboarding and you're defining roles and writing job descriptions. You could use this framework to help you get really crystal clear on what does great look like, What does someone need to be able to do? And what kind of environment are we putting them into? So instead of throwing people into ambiguity and hoping they can figure it out, you're really setting them up for success from the start. So, for example, with one organization, I created output-based job descriptions that used, the output, the criteria, and other things, behaviors that really made it clear for them to set expectations for people starting a job. And also, we used it for career pathing. So, additionally, I was creating some leadership training for a construction company, and we defined all the outputs and standards and then used that to determine what skills and knowledge were needed. And the next is the reactivity. So something isn't working, like with Mia, orders are backing up, performance is off. The instinct is to jump straight to training. But this framework helps us step back and ask, where's the breakdown really happening? Is it with the expectations? Is it capability? Or is it the environment? One other useful way that I've used this in the real world is through performance coaching. So if your performance is defined by outputs and criteria, it makes it really easy for a manager to have an objective coaching session that's effective. Jeannie gave you some examples of ways that you could actually see the skill and observe it. But actually, if you define their work by outputs, and this is something that the worker leaves behind, you don't even have to observe them. You can actually observe the output and say, hey, this does not meet the criteria, so something's going on here. So now that you're familiar with the framework, which of these three do you think you or your organization has been overlooking the most? Put it in the chat, either one, work, two, worker, or three, workplace.
I'm curious to see.
Yeah, workplace, work. Yeah, a lot of workplace.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we're fairly good at defining the work. I think there's still a lot of ambiguity when we use behaviors, but three is definitely something overlooked because it's not usually in our realm. It's something that sometimes we have to go outside of learning and development to,
Right.
to fix, right? So
Mm-hmm.
one, two, and three, Charles says. So great. So hopefully you found this useful. So let's talk a little bit about who owns performance. So we've been talking about Mia in a coffee shop, and obviously some organizations can be more complex than that. In larger organizations, different parts of the system are responsible for different pieces of performance. So HR plays a role in defining the work, but often the roles are defined at a high level, competencies, behaviors, broad descriptions. And what's often missing is that clarity on the actual outputs, what people are expected to produce and what good looks like. L&D comes in, they help develop the worker, but the learning is often focused on general skills and knowledge, not always a clear connection to the actual work. And what people need is practice tied to the outputs they're responsible for so that they can perform at their best and not just complete a training. And then managers, they're closest to the performance. They're the ones setting expectations day to day, observing what's happening, and shaping the environment people are working in. And I just want to make sure the point here is that, these areas need to be talking to each other. They need to agree on what the performance is, and they need to work together to create that effective performance system.
All right. And here we are in this brave new world of AI. Everyone's talking about it, and we're all trying to find ways to have AI help us in our work, in our lives, and streamline our processes, and really be valuable thought partners for us, right? So if you have the resources, you could create a complex system that funnels information and metrics and analyzes it automatically, right? But at the bare minimum, a low lift but high reward way to use AI here is creating personas. So you may have access just to Gemini gems if that's all you have available, but there's tons of options out there. Just instruct your persona to be the master of all the things that we talked about today. So it's a master of work, worker, workplace. Put in the instructions also prompts, like tell it to prompt the user with questions on what questions it should be gathering. And then the user can input the organization's or the department's goals, the expectations that they've set, and then the observations. So things that they've noticed with the performance. Maybe it's the output, like Therese mentioned, or maybe it's a direct skill performance a gap that you're noticing. And then the output, hopefully your AI bot, whatever you name it, will produce some performance and improvement suggestions for you. All right. And here's our mic drop final note. If you watch the show New Girl, this is the goosebumps walk away. Guesswork. Guesswork. Oh, some claps. Maybe you've seen New Girl. Guesswork isn't a performance strategy. You all ask yourself this question. Are you taking the time to invest in proper analysis, or are you throwing darts at a dartboard from too far away? That's all we have. All right. And of course, we'd love to stay connected. Teresa and I can talk about this all day long.
Absolutely.
Scan our QR code and shoot us a message, and we'd happy to give you some guidance on how to accomplish this in your own organization. Are there any questions we have?
There are. I was about to say we have a handful, so let's get the party started. We have about 9 minutes, so let's get going. So one person asked, which thankfully some of the members in the chat kind of gave their thoughts, but how do you truly have an anonymous questionnaire?
Um, well, there are settings within, depends on your system, how you have it set up, but there are truly anonymous settings in your survey tool that you're using. And making sure that the users are aware of that. Um, and so they can feel honest or the ability to respond honestly in their survey. Depends on
Beautiful.
what tool you're using, I guess.
I was gonna say, Susan, if you would want to let us know. But perfect. There was another question. How do you adjust this framework to use with knowledge workers?
I saw that one pop in. Can you define what you mean by knowledge workers?
Yes, if you could, I apologize. I did not capture your name for that question, but if you could drop it out, Beverly, if you could let us know what you mean by that, we can hop to the next question.
Unless Therese, do you know
I
maybe
can,
what they mean?
yeah, I can address that a little bit.
Okay, okay,
So people like us that use our brains more than our hands, like someone who's not
okay.
necessarily in manufacturing or something like that, that's the outputs are really clear cut. So actually outputs can be anything, right? An output could be a relationship, it could be a decision, it can be documents. So outputs aren't necessarily, they can't be the result of things that we think, right? So we didn't go deep into how to define outputs and all of that, and I'm happy to do that offline with anybody. But that's where it's the same. So everything we did, it's just the clarity of defining the output for no matter what the job is. And I've done it for leaders. We've done it for all different roles. So project management, yeah. So it doesn't matter what type of job it is. This applies across the board.
Beautiful. And since we're talking about framework, Mulaney would love to see your mic drop slide one more time. So if you could flip over to that one, Danny. But even more so was asking, what is the framework called again?
Um,
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Worker, workplace.
Yeah, we don't
Yep.
have necessarily a
The
specific name
title.
for it.
Hmm.
Love
Yep, just
it.
using the worker, workplace and keeping those three key components in mind. When you see a performance issue, ask yourself, did I dig deep enough into all three of those components? And then remembering, within each of those components, there's several factors and variables within each of those as well. And
Beautiful.
you'll have access to this deck, correct? So they'll be able to see the detail. Yep, perfect. So,
Exactly.
mhm.
Mulaney said thank you, so you can go back to the next one in case anybody didn't get those QR codes. But there is a beautiful discussion after you addressed the anonymous survey that more questions kind of appeared. So Ross saying, how would you combat the mistrust that almost everyone has on anonymous surveys? And then Dwayne was like, don't you think a need for an anonymous survey is a red flag, that there are other maybe bigger issues at play? So do you have any thoughts on that kind of discussion?
Yeah, and I'd say I'd open up for discussion too on the best way to how do you find out if someone's motivated? How do you find out if someone it's a will versus skill? Do they want to be there? Um, I
And
think with an anonymous survey, it depends on how you position it and how you address it. 'Cause if you can imagine, if you have your leader and transparently coming together with all of the results, and you've got this grid of, okay, looks like, hey guys, to be honest, we didn't do so hot in this area. We got 3 stars on this component here about motivation, or 3 stars on leadership, something, something, and being able to talk openly about it and say, yeah, here's how we're going to address that. Here's how we're going to change that. And we're going to take this offline and figure something out and come back with a plan. And now those that filled out that survey, they every time they click on it, like, all right, I'm not going to get in trouble for saying that I'm not motivated. My leadership is going to address it appropriately. And I feel confident and I'm excited to respond honestly because I know that it's going to be taken care of.
so I'll just add to that. So in performance improvement circles, some of this work is based on Tom Gilbert's behavior engineering. And
Mhm.
so if you look that up, he wrote an amazing book called Human Competence. And his is based similarly to Carl Binder's Six Boxes. But what they say is if you take care of all these other things, motivation sort of takes care of itself, right? Because usually people are motivated by maybe incentives, or maybe they aren't motivated because they don't know how to do the work right, or even, what we didn't talk about today is um, capability and the person in the right seat, like maybe they're not even in the right role. So if you address all of these factors, typically the motivation is going to take care of itself. Yeah.
Beautiful. And the questions just keep coming. So I think this will be our last one, but for all the questions, of course, that didn't get addressed, the Sweet Rush team will be reaching out. But Susan then asked, authentic ownership inherently belongs to the performer. How do we get employees to claim ownership and authentic buy-in in what they do?
Jeannie, you want to take that or you want me to?
Do you have I've got some things I'm thinking about, but go ahead if you've got something off the cuff.
No, go ahead. I'll let you start. I'll let you start and I'll add on.
Okay. Um, yeah, I think this one is really tricky, right? It's about culture building and helping them really see the why in what they're doing. So if it's customer service or whatever the organization or skill set may be, helping them understand the bigger picture, not only for their role and their impact, but also maybe their impact within their peers internally, not just, maybe it's external impact and then how what their actions are doing, how they impact how your other peers may be working. And helping to, and I think that starts with understanding your audience really well as well. Really understanding who your people are and where they might be coming from, and addressing those personalities and perspectives uh, appropriately.
I'd say anything for you, Therese?
No, I'm good.
Beautiful. Well, with that, thank you, ladies, so much for today's session. Is there anything else you would like to say before we hop to our first break and next session?
Thanks for being
Well,
here.
yeah, thanks for being here
That was
and
fun.
feel free to connect with us. Love to talk more about what's going on in your organization. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, with your LinkedIn's in the chat, I imagine you're about to have a good amount of connections after this. It was
Great.
such a
I hope
lovely
so.
discussion.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for having us, Liz.
Yeah, of course. So for everyone else, we are going to take about another 15 to 16-minute break. So up next, we do have the Info Pro team for their session, 3 questions performance-focused L&Ds can finally answer with the data, not with AI. So in just a moment, I will end this session. You can join our next session by returning to that event lobby and going to the session tab. I hope you all stick around for our next session, which will begin at the top of the hour. See you then, guys.